Our brain is an amazing tool. The left hemisphere, for example, excels at logical thinking and identifying causes and effects of events. However, it tends to oversimplify, leaning toward straightforward explanations. A worldview where every event has hundreds of causes and just as many consequences isn't something our brain enjoys. Uncertainty, after all, is a major source of stress. That said, we often perceive the world not through logic, but through certain, let's call them generalizations, or as we'd say today, mental programs. These are things we don't need to analyze but simply take for granted. One such program is the belief that if someone of our species is bigger than us, they're probably stronger too. This instinct is common among animals, where intimidation tactics are often about appearing larger. I've come across the idea that the crests on helmets were designed with this same principle in mind. Big means strong, and strong means victorious, is a notion heavily used in movies, where the hero is often impossible to imagine without massive muscles. It's also one subconscious reason people hit the gym, to build a physique that implies a higher position in the social hierarchy. But as soon as you start looking deeper into the subject, the picture becomes less straightforward. It turns out that successful fighters in various martial arts, like fencers, don't tend to be mountains of muscle. Meanwhile, bodybuilders and weightlifters rarely excel in combat sports. That's because muscles are more complex than they seem. Without diving too deep into the science, even two people with the same muscle volume can have vastly different physical abilities, and different training methods develop different kinds of strength. People seem to have known for a long time that lifting heavy objects makes you stronger. Stone blocks that serve the same purpose as modern kettlebells date back to ancient Egypt. One fascinating archaeological find is a 143-kilogram stone bearing an inscription claiming that a Greek named Bybon, son of Pholos, lifted it overhead with one hand. Whether it's a joke or the truth is hard to say, but in the early 20th century, Arthur Saxon managed to outdo that by lifting 159 kilograms with one hand. On the island of Santorini, another stone was discovered, weighing 480 kilograms with an inscription stating that Eumastas, son of Critobulus, lifted it off the ground. Whether Eumastas was a strong man or just a teenager looking to immortalize his name, history doesn't tell us. In ancient Rome, athletic performances were already a thing. Records mention an athlete named Athanatus, who paraded around in armor weighing 200 kilograms, and someone named Fabius Silvius, who climbed stairs carrying over 300 kilograms. It's worth noting that while strongmen have always existed, the ability to build truly massive muscles only emerged in the 20th century. And yes, big muscles are a sign of strength, but their size doesn't directly correlate with power. Otherwise, bodybuilders would dominate powerlifting competitions, and that's clearly not the case. If you look at bodybuilders from the early 20th century, you might notice that today's average gym-goers can sometimes look bigger. That's because we now know that muscle growth requires lifting heavy weights with a specific number of repetitions, progressive overload, adequate rest, and proper nutrition. Genetics, of course, play a role, as do popular anabolic substances. Additionally, modern times have brought specialized exercises and machines designed to isolate specific muscles. In the past, most exercises were compound movements that distributed effort across multiple muscle groups. Often, there weren't even dedicated exercises at all. This reminds me of the book The Lost Art of Running by Benzi Shine and Majorie Tim, where the author encounters a troupe of traveling circus performers in Morocco who amazed him with their physical abilities. As it turns out, they didn't even know what an exercise was. They simply trained by practicing the elements they performed for audiences. Similarly, when the author tried to uncover the secret techniques or exercises that make Kenyan runners so dominant, he was in for a surprise. It turns out that Kenyans don't focus on running techniques. Their success likely comes from being highly active from a young age, spending little time sitting, and having good posture, which allows them to make better use of their body's elasticity. So what's the point here? Historically, the most common form of training was what we now call functional training. Though that name does carry a bit of a modern marketing vibe, the essence is simple. If you wanted to lift heavy objects, you practiced lifting heavy objects. If you wanted to run, you ran. To jump better, you jumped. Success in fencing came from fencing practice, and accuracy in archery required shooting arrows. Most exercises as we know them today are largely a product of modern times, when fitness became part of the market economy. This brought an explosion of trends, techniques, supplements, and countless products to sell. At the same time, I've noticed a trend where basic exercises are presented as something extraordinarily complex, requiring a trainer's help. Otherwise, it's claimed one wrong angle and bam, your joints, tendons, or even your life are at risk. But, as Dmitry Kalashnikov points out, there's no proven link between technique and injury. It's often poor technique when someone lifts a weight they're not prepared for that leads to injury. But hey, if trainers are making money off clients, I'd rather it be them than cigarette or alcohol companies. Anyway, back to the point. Historically, training mostly meant practicing what you wanted to master. And if we're talking about medieval historical fencing, yes, it does require some strength. But the weight of most one-handed weapons rarely exceeded 1.5 kilograms. The difference is that with swords, much of their weight was concentrated in the hilt for better control, while axes and maces had the bulk of their weight at the head of the weapon. During combat, though, weapons weren't abruptly stopped mid-swing. Instead, they followed circular paths, conserving energy. Naturally, if you're an office worker with little physical activity, your wrist will give out within minutes of a practice duel. But generally, with rare exceptions, melee weapons weren't all that heavy. In battle, speed, coordination, and stamina mattered far more. It doesn't matter how hard you can strike if you've already been stabbed with a sharp piece of iron. Speaking of which, skilled fighters and runners sometimes used a method known since ancient times, practicing their usual activity while wearing extra weight, like running or sparring in armor. Even so, this mostly involved aerobic exercises, primarily engaging the legs and cardiovascular system. Running or fighting in armor weighing 20 to 30 kilograms didn't significantly build muscle mass. Building muscle requires heavy weights, intense focus on specific muscles, proper rest, nutrition, and good genetics. And let's not forget that actors like Hafthor Bjornsson, the Mountain from Game of Thrones, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson spent endless hours in the gym and have openly admitted to using steroids. Dr. Todd Schroeder, director of the Clinical Exercise Research Center at the University of Southern California, reported that 75% of Marvel actors have used performance-enhancing drugs to get in shape. When Chris Evans, the famous Captain America, claims he gained 9 kilograms of lean muscle in 3 months while being vegetarian, it's not realistic to think you could do the same. Even Sylvester Stallone was caught in 2007 trying to enter Australia with 48 vials of anabolic steroids, which were banned there. Arnold Schwarzenegger openly admitted to steroid use throughout his bodybuilding career, even specifying the drugs and dosages. In fact, most of the big guys we see on screen would probably amaze medieval people because their physique is the result of years of training, nutrition, and of course, modern pharmacology. Filmmakers and artists love to exploit how our brains work, presenting knights, samurai, and other warriors as muscle-bound titans. But that's just not how it was. Back then, knights were depicted with much more modest proportions. Meanwhile, bows today are often seen as light weapons, the choice of women or delicate elves. That's not entirely accurate. The gap between modern and medieval bows is immense. This is because today's bows use advanced synthetic materials, allowing a bow with a lower draw weight to be much more efficient than an old wooden bow with higher tension. On the other hand, modern archers face different challenges. They don't need to shoot heavy arrows, weighing around 100 grams, at distances of several hundred meters. Instead, they focus on accuracy, typically shooting at distances of up to 90 meters, and their arrows weigh less than 20 grams. Modern bows typically have a draw weight under 30 kilograms, while medieval longbows started at that weight, with many ranging from 35 to 70 kilograms. Out of curiosity, I decided to test how much draw weight my untrained arm could handle. When you pull correctly, engaging your back muscles, it should be easier, but I was pulling incorrectly, mostly with my shoulder. On my first few attempts, let's call them warm-ups, I managed 27 kilograms. Feeling inspired, I turned on the camera to demonstrate my power and reached 45 to 46 kilograms. Turns out I had accidentally switched the scale to pounds. After a few more pulls, my untrained muscles were exhausted, and the draw weight dropped to about 20 kilograms. Today, there's a guy named Mark Stretton who in 2004 shot a bow with a 90-kilogram draw weight. Historical evidence suggests bows like his existed in the past. Mark's preparation involved training with heavy draw bows and exercises that we might now call functional training. He lifted anvil over 100 kilograms and did pull-ups using only his fingertips. According to his physiotherapist, drawing a 90-kilogram bow put over half a ton of pressure on his skeleton. Actually, in one of my previous videos, I mentioned the deformed skeleton of an archer from the sunken Mary Rose ship. Researcher Anna Sterland, in her monograph, pointed out that due to the constant strain from pulling a bowstring, some archers' skeletons began to develop more bone mass. What happened to their tendons and muscles under such stress is anyone's guess. Archery training wasn't just about pulling a heavy bow once, it was about doing it repeatedly, with almost no breaks, which honestly sounds a lot like working out on modern gym equipment. Some argue archery takes decades to master. Of course, we're all different, with our own natural talents. And you can find stories online where someone took up archery and within 6 months became a master archer. There were no formal schools for English archers back then. They were farmers and yeomen who practiced in their spare time. What motivated them was King Edward III's policy of nationwide archery tournaments with valuable prizes. Since land and free peasants were scarce and there were plenty of children, military service with state support and the chance to plunder French villages seemed like a good deal. An archer had to do more than shoot accurately. Often, accuracy wasn't even needed since battle arrows were fired in arcs. But they needed incredible endurance. A skilled archer could draw a heavy bow over 10 times a minute. So contrary to the common stereotype, I'd venture to say that the physically strongest guys in an army were probably the archers. That said, don't jump to the conclusion that their strength would let them dominate knights in hand-to-hand combat. Different activities develop different physical profiles, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. In the East, whether we're talking about Slavs, Arabs, nomads, or the Japanese, there wasn't a clear-cut division between archers and melee fighters. The bow was a versatile tool, keeping warriors sharp and strong. So don't underestimate this weapon. You might call the bow the granddaddy of workout machines, much better at building muscles than swinging around an oversized hunk of steel.